Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Stock market, finance, economy, natural disasters. We have China and even the west part of the US having record 3-digit heat waves. Obviously in Celsius, it's, on 40 degrees or so. Overall, markets were generally positive, and we even have a city in Europe which is banning ads on meat. Overall, for the week, markets mostly positive in the US and Canada. There was a report that came out from the Fed that said that the US household net worth has fallen $6 trillion in Q2. And because of the situation with inflation as well, because people are hurting, they have 69 million households that are canceling vacations, driving less, cutting grocery bills as inflation hits home based on a poll. So this is kind of the overarching premise of the worry of what's happening in the global economy, because right now we have a situation where things aren't going well. And if you think about what we've lived through, especially if you're younger, you don't know kind of this government-induced boom that we've been living since 2008 when they dropped the interest rates since the lowest level in recorded history, not just in the history of the United States, but in the history of the world. So what does that create? They drop the interest rates, and that increases consumption, right? If they drop the interest rates, people take more risky loans out. They start more businesses. They put more on their credit card because they can finance the debt. They buy more houses because it's cheaper. If the interest is cheaper, you pay a lower monthly payment. And so this created a huge boom, the bubble of bubbles. And then what happens? Well, people see their pensions fund going up because the stocks are increasing at a rapid rate, the houses, right? And so then you feel rich, and then you go out and spend more money because you feel rich. And remember that in the United States, the consumer spending is almost 70% of the economy. And most other major, the word I'm thinking of is evolved, not evolved. The first or second world nations, for example, let's say the more advanced economies, most of them are over 50% consumer spending. So now that the governments are starting to increase the interest rates, that puts a break on this expansion. House prices don't keep going up because people can no longer make the payments, right? The interest rates on houses, for example, has gone up from 3 to 6. That doesn't necessarily double your mortgage payment, but it goes up by a lot, $500, $1,000, $2,000. And then add on top of that the situation with inflation. People are spending a lot less money, and they're starting to conserve, again, consumer spending. You can see why we have a situation where, the brakes are getting hit pretty hard right now when it comes to the global economy. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in the beginning are the home closings, right? The real estate market in the US is about 17 to 18% of the economy. So in July, if I'm not mistaken, we've had, it's either last month or July, one of those two. I believe it's July. This was from Kyle Bass, by the way, a great hedge fund manager. There's been the second lowest number of home closings on record. So the second least amount of closings for houses ever. The first one was in 2007. Now, take into consideration, this isn't adjusted for inflation. We're talking about 15 years ago was the lowest point, right before the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. The population has increased by how much since 2007? And even with more people, more movement, more money, it's still the second lowest amount of closings. So that kind of tells you everything. And that is about 17, 18% of the economy. So you can see, this is why I like to do these videos, because now you can see how you can start connecting all the dots, right? You can see what the expectation is for the future, etc. Overseas markets, European markets mostly higher. Turkey being an emerging market, they smashed the stock market this week at over 9%. Latin America was mostly mixed. The Merval in Argentina was over 6%. Africa and the Middle East, they're mostly mixed, with Egypt taking the crown there for most positive. And then in the far, far east, you have the Shanghai in China going up by 2.37%. Bitcoin and cryptos, I didn't have time to do the full-on research. Obviously, we have the change in the Ethereum network, but for the most part, the cryptos were up this week, like a lot of the markets, right? Bitcoin was up over 7%. It hit 19,850 and change. And then for the month, last month, remember in August, it was down over 20%, while for the year in 2022, it's down almost 60%. In commodities, I thought this was really unusual. There's a Dutch city is going to ban meat advertisements. And this is all part of the preppers were right. Da-na-na-na-na-na. Now, why would they ban advertisements for meat? Now, let's put this all together, right? Conspiracy Marcello. The Dutch is the second largest exporter of food in the world, right? So remember, I believe it was, if I got my weeks right, about 5 weeks ago, we talked about the protests in the Netherlands, how the farmers were literally dumping excrement of animals at the offices of the politicians, blocking the highways because they're trying to change because of the greenhouse gases and the quote unquote save the environment. They want to cut down on the fertilizer because obviously that causes whatever amount of problems. So if we kind of look at whether it's wrong or right, or you agree with it or don't agree with it, I don't want to get political, but the thing is that this is how they start, right? First they ban the ads, then they start raising the taxes, and then after that they try to ban the consumption completely. Now you can believe me or not, but you're going to own nothing and be happy. EU aluminum production is down to the 1970s level. Remember that EU really doesn't have any commodities. They import a lot of their items, ergo the situation, the crisis that they're having with Russia. They buy more than half of their aluminum outside the bloc, the EU bloc. And this is a significant problem because the world needs aluminum, right? We make aluminum in everything. It's in cars and planes and the Coke cans that you drink. And so because of the energy crisis and because of the plants are so energy intensive, they're talking about shutting down the last remaining aluminum plant that's running in Slovakia. And so you can see how we start to connect the dots here, right? Now imagine this problem that we've been having with the supply chain, and now they're starting to shut down factories because they don't have the energy, or I should say the money, to pay the energy to make this stuff anymore. So you see how you connect the dots, how that's going to come down the line, right? OPEC announced on Monday that it's going to cut its production by 100 barrels per day in October. Oil prices have fallen 25% since June after it hit a multi-year high in March. And obviously this is due to the fact that the interest rate situation where they keep increasing the interest rates, or they're threatening that they're going to increase them. So that calls back the demand, calls back the consumer spending, which is the biggest percentage of the global economy. So if people aren't out spending money and the economy isn't moving, obviously they're not going to buy as much oil, then demand goes down quite a bit. Japan is currently importing 94% of its energy supply. The Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Yasutoshi Nishimura, hopefully I said that correctly. They are starting to reactivate nuclear plants. Now, what's the worst that could happen? Fukushima. Excuse me, I had a little bit on my nose. European gas prices are up by 35% on Monday. The futures in gas are surging over 280% year to date. This is due to the fact that Russia cut off the pipeline, at first saying there was an oil leak, and now they're saying that they're not going to turn it back on until they remove all the sanctions. So now the truth is coming out. U.S. crude and Brent both went down as well. Very little, 0.09% for crude, 0.19 for Brent. And this is really interesting to me because Russia now is planning to create an entirely new pricing infrastructure for international precious metals. Now, gold doesn't really have an industrial use, right? Gold is just kind of like a safe haven. Central banks buy it. Crazy conspiracy theory. Marcello buys it. And so it's just kind of like it's money, right? It's just, silver, on the other hand, is an industrial metal. This is why I'm so big on silver. If you guys have been following me for a while, I invest in a lot of the miners. I trade the miners. And so silver is in solar panels. They're in the batteries for the EVs. They're in the back of mirrors, all kinds of things. And so it's really interesting that right now the situation is that there's a monopoly on the pricing of gold and silver in New York and London. Now Russia, with their little economic union in Central Asia, they're gonna create another metals exchange where people don't have to buy dollars, don't have to buy pounds or euros to be able to price the metals that we need, especially silver. Another thing that's really interesting, which is the Gazprom, which is the state-run oil company and gas company in Russia, they're going to shift to the payments with China in rubles for gas and won from the euro. So you can see that we're starting to have a fracture kind of in the way things are normally done. And that's a really bad thing, because the reason why the United States is a preeminent world power is basically on the petrodollar system, where the president in the United States made an agreement with Saudi Arabia where anyone that needed oil had to get them in dollars. So this created a huge demand for dollars, and now it's just a custom that everybody uses dollars. And so what happens when people stop using the dollar and the demand isn't there anymore? The majority, take a look at this, the majority of the dollars that have been printed are outside of the US. So now if countries stop using the dollar and the money comes back to the US, what happens? Think about supply and demand. When there's a lot of something, the value of that something goes down. When it's in short supply, like, Kanye West underwear, the demand is up because there's not enough to go around. So there's not a lot of demand for it. So the value goes up. So this is what I think is happening right now, because there's a situation where I think we have one more big rally. The dollar right now is at record highs, 20, 30, 40-year highs against a lot of currencies. And this is what essentially we call what's called a bull trap, where it's kind of like everybody's getting tricked into getting into the dollar because it's the least dirty shirt in the closet, the least dirty currency in the closet. And then after just a moment, from one moment to the next, the rug is going to be pulled out and the dollar is going to collapse. Now, that might not be this year. It might be in a year or two, for example. It might be in 5 years, depending on what the government does, right? But just remember that. And remember that even though we have hard times coming, hard times are one of the best ways to get rich and do really, really well. So keep that in mind. Gold and silver. Gold went up by 0.29% to 1718, while silver went up 4.35% to 1894. Financing and banking news, as I mentioned, the U.S. index, the dollar reached a 24-year peak against the yen. It's at its strongest point against the Korean won as April 2009, and even hit a 20-year high on Monday against the euro. What a lot of people thought that wasn't possible is now that the currency from Britain, which I'm thinking of it in Spanish, the pound, the sterling, they're in a situation where the US dollar is at its strongest point since 1985. Reserve Bank of Australia raised their rates, Malaysia's as well. Again, the whole world essentially is doing it except for, maybe 5 countries or so. The China consumer prices rose lower than expected in August, and the rate of producer inflation hit an 18-month low. This is obviously a situation where it reflects China being a plagued economy by weak domestic demand. So even the Chinese economy is getting hit pretty bad. And also the ECB, which is a central bank in Europe, is increasing their rates by 0.75 or 75 basis points. Average U.S. 30-year mortgage climbed to 5.89%, which is the highest since 2008. Again, housing market, 17 to 18% of the economy. And also in political news, Chileans voted against a new progressive constitution that was drafted to replace the constitution from the 1981 from the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Chile, if you guys didn't know, is the only first world country in all of Latin America. Death claims, I thought this was really weird. This is part of Conspiracy Marcello. Death claims in adults aged 35 to 44 are 100% higher than expected in July, August, and September of 2021. I thought this was really interesting because if you think about it analytically, that wasn't the peak of the pandemic, right? That was after. And we don't really have reports about people dying of the thing from the pandemic. I don't want to say the keywords because I don't get banned. So what was instituted around or before 2021 that could possibly change the expected death rates of people from 35 to 44 years old? I'm not going to say it, but just think about it. Liz Truss is the new UK's prime minister. She beat a gentleman called Rishi Sunak for the Conservative Party there in the UK. And historic gun sales. There have been 37 straight months in the United States where there have been more than 1 million guns being sold, which are historic numbers in the United States. Economic news, Japan is seeing its first contraction in the service sector since March. likely due to the spike in the COVID cases, in addition to the inflationary pressures and the worsening economic outlook. UK construction firms' second month of contraction in the UK, in addition to the European Union. Their construction activity fell at its fastest pace since 2021. So you can see all the red flags that are coming, right? Mortgage rates are now double what they were than a year ago. Home prices have started to fall at 0.77%, down from June to July. And it's the largest monthly decline since January 2011, the first monthly drop of any size in 32 months. So the bubble's starting to pop. Corporate news. Volkswagen on Monday. Volkswagen is the car company out of Germany which owns Porsche. They're talking about taking Porsche public, even with record inflation and the crisis, the energy crisis there in Europe. They're saying that it could be the biggest IPO being initial public offering, the first time a company goes public in German history, and the biggest in Europe since 1999. They expect a valuation between 60 to 85 billion euros, which is now 60 to 85 billion dollars. One thing, I saw a meme on Instagram where, because of the strength of the dollar, they were like, no, we're not going to call it football anymore. Now it's called soccer because the dollar's back on top. Trade news. Freight rates for containers and dry bulkers are now fallen over the past 3 months. They expect it to continue falling into 2024. So now that the consumption is down, it's another indicator that the economy isn't moving and we're headed for not good things in the future. Apple announced new products, including the iPhone 14. So now you can pay anywhere between $800 to $1,100 for a new phone that works for exactly the same way as your old phone. And in investment news, the UN World Food Program is warning of a catastrophic floods in Pakistan are starting to exacerbate the food crisis in Afghanistan. Nearly 50% of people are facing hunger in Afghanistan. And remember, this is where it starts, right? In these poor third world countries. And then after that, it starts coming to the more advanced countries. And a huge asteroid, twice the size of Big Ben being the clock tower. If you guys don't know what that is, Google it, or maybe free spoke it. There's a new search engine out there for those of you guys that want to use it. That's going to smash into the Earth's orbit this month. They don't know where the asteroid is going to strike, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And record-breaking heat waves in western parts of the U.S., triple digits in Fahrenheit, almost 40 degrees in Celsius. And even China is having their record hottest August since records began. And last but not least, the Queen Elizabeth II, may she rest in peace, passed away on Thursday at age 96. And now King Charles III is going to address the British people. And remember that the majority of the world is still paying the English monarchy to be their king, Canada and New Zealand included. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm going to enjoy an amazing dinner here in Medellin, Colombia. They're coming out with a digital nomad visa, so get on that because it's a lot cheaper to live here than in the U.S. See you next week.